Okay. All right. So panelists, if you would please just turn off your audio and video for now until your time, and then we will call on you as it comes. So. Welcome everyone. I'm just going to give it another minute here. Thank you all for being here. We're going to let people get in, and then we'll get started in just 1 minute. All right, we will start at 3:05. Just another moment. All right, I'm going to go ahead and just introduce and welcome you all. Thank you for spending your afternoon with us and being here today. I'm Nick Cortez. I'm chair of the California Progressive Alliance and co-coordinator for South Bay Progressive Alliance. This event, we are calling this our first Alliance community exercise. We hope to have a number of future ones in the near future here, hosted by a number of our alliances from around the state. We are a all volunteer group of progressive activists working to push progressive policies and elect progressive candidates throughout California. We have a wonderful lineup. I'm super excited for our speakers today. We have, and for those of you that aren't aware, South Bay Progressive Alliance is located in the San Jose area. I know we have some people from around the state here today. SBPA is affiliated with the California Progressive Alliance. And we're an all volunteer organization. If you're not already an alliance member or an ally, please check our websites, reach out to us, connect with us. We want to build this movement. You know, in this time, and this pandemic has shown how weak and broken our current system is. Solutions are out there. We are going to find, or we are going to highlight and push forward some of those solutions. We're going to talk about those today. Our panelists are here to highlight some of those issues, and together we can create a more equitable, resilient, and sustainable society. Our first speaker is Malinda Markowitz. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Peggy to introduce Malinda.
Hi there, I'm Peggy, and I'm happy to introduce Malinda Markowitz, who is the co-president of the California Nurses Association. California Nurses Association and the National Nurses Organizing Committee is an organization of registered nurses and one of the nation's fastest growing labor and professional organizations in the U.S. with more than 100,000 members in hospitals, clinics, and home health agencies in all 50 states. It is also one of the main organizers of the campaign for HR 1384, the Medicare for All bill in the House of Representatives, introduced by Pramila Jayapal. Malinda is a member of the SBPA, South Bay Progressive Alliance Steering Committee, as representative of CNA. So welcome, Malinda.
Yes, hello everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak today, and I'm very honored. As Peggy said, my name is Malinda Markowitz. I'm president of the California Nurses Association and a registered nurse. For decades, CNA has been on the front lines working to create a more humane healthcare system based on patient need, not one that leads to personal pain for the majority, so that only a few can walk away with massive profits. For more than 38 years, I have worked as a registered nurse and had a front row seat to the pain and suffering caused by the injustice inherent in our health industry. That makes money by denying care without regard to the well-being of patients and a healthcare industry that picks and chooses who can get care and what and when, depending on their ability to pay. Frontline nurses have watched in horror as the COVID-19 pandemic has unfolded across the country. Not only has our fragmented and broken system failed us in our efforts to fight COVID-19, but it has left us wholly unprepared for the battle. We have seen how just-in-time staffing and supplies left nurses vulnerable to infection and exposure because hospitals failed to ensure that there was enough personal protective equipment available for staff. We have seen how years of failing to staff properly left units without nurses to provide high-quality care as more and more people needed care as they became ill with this deadly disease. Despite the gains made under the Affordable Care Act, there are still close to 29 million Americans who have no insurance before the onset of the pandemic. These are Americans who can't afford to see a doctor when they get sick with the virus or obtain the care they need to stay alive. Our communities of color are feeling the harshest sting of the COVID, as people of color are much less likely to have health care insurance, and those who do have insurance are often underinsured, meaning that getting health care they need still costs a lot of money in the form of premium, co-pays, and deductibles. As a result of this institutionalized racism, communities of color are affected with untreated conditions such as hypertension, diabetes, and asthma at a much higher rate than the overall population. Making the situation worse, people of color are often the frontline workers in our communities during this crisis, and oftentimes don't have the luxury of being able to quarantine. When you combine all of this with an inability to get tested for COVID-19 or care once ill, it's not surprising that the disparity between population percentage and death due to the virus among Black Americans is in particular are high as 40% in some parts of the country. Nurses understand that in order for us to combat this pandemic, we need a series of aggressive testing, tracking, and quarantine policies, and the ability to quarantine without going hungry and homeless. Such policies require that we actually know who contacts the virus and with whom that person has been in contact. When people can't afford to see their doctor, they are less likely to report being sick. These people then contribute to community spread because we can't quarantine people we haven't identified as sick or a carrier. Every single person who isn't able to see a doctor makes our efforts to fight this pandemic that much harder. Ultimately, we're going to need a vaccine administered to as much of the country as possible. That means that everybody should be able to get the vaccine without worrying about how much they're going to have to pay. Yet in February, the Health Secretary, Alex Azar, refused to commit to ensuring that a vaccine would be affordable, let alone free. When we allow profits to dictate the ability to get health care we need, it defeats the entire purpose of a vaccine, which is to immunize enough of the country to establish a herd immunity so we can protect everyone. We will never get there if people don't get vaccinated because they can't afford it. Another major flaw in our broken healthcare system that is highlighted by the pandemic is the fact that 60% of Americans get their health insurance through their employer. I'm sure that everyone in this room knows someone, and some of you may be that someone, who has stayed at the job just because they feared losing their insurance. Yet employers can switch their employees to an entirely new insurance plan that might be substantially worse than the prior one at a whim, and there's nothing that workers can do about it if you aren't unionized. Ultimately, it makes absolutely no sense to tie people's ability to get health care to where or even whether they work. People who become sick with a virus as serious as the COVID-19 may end up utilizing all their sick time. Their illnesses may cause them to lose their job, which translates into losing their health care they direly need because they are sick. It's a vicious cycle. Right now, we're seeing millions of people lose their jobs, and with those jobs, their employer-based health care. It is estimated by the time this is over, as many as 35 million Americans could lose their employer-based health insurance. 35 million people. Imagine that on the top of the 29 million people who didn't have insurance before the onset of the pandemic. This more than doubles our country's number of uninsured. How will these workers be able to see a doctor? How will their children get the health care they need? Let me take a moment to talk more about our fragmented, profit-driven healthcare system left us so completely unprepared for this pandemic. The pursuit of cost-cutting to maximize their profits. Large hospital chains have been buying up smaller hospitals, smaller ones, at a record pace. This phenomenon has decimated our caregiving capacity at a time when we need it the most. Over the last decade, there has been 680 hospital mergers, and this has resulted in the number of hospital beds across the country decreasing from 1.5 million in 1975 to 900,000 right now. You might ask, how does this happen? Well, these new corporate hospital chains, run largely by invested brokers, not doctors, close hospitals, or even within hospitals they deem that are not profitable. And I might want to just mention right here that I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but we have a hospital here that's owned by HCA, Regional Medical Center, that will be closing their May 31st, their maternal child departments permanently. And what's really disgusting is that this is an area that serve the underprivileged and that don't have the money, may not have vehicles, and may have to travel across the city to either Good Samaritan Hospital or Valley Medical, and we know how bad our traffic is, or they're going to go to the emergency room at Regional Medical Center to get care in the emergency room, where all the COVID-19 patients come into the hospital, which is totally ridiculous. And so I would like to say May 1st, this next Friday at 3:45 in front of the hospital, which is 2275 Jackson, there's going to be a protest of the closing. So I really urge people to go and protest what HCA is doing at Regional Medical Center. So as I said, these closures hit poorer and rural areas the hardest, since most right targets for merger and acquisitions are in the small rural areas and community hospitals that are losing money due to less foot traffic. As a result, it is estimated by the time we hit our peak of the COVID-19 patients, we will be nearly short 16,000 beds of what we need to take care of the patients. Prioritizing profits over all else has left us with critical shortages of personal protective equipment, or PPE, and ventilators. This is because it isn't profitable for hospitals to stockpile the PPE and other necessary equipment. So hospitals typically only order what they expect they will need for the next few days. This just-in-time supply chain results in us only having a fraction of our respirators, gloves, gowns, face shields, and ventilators we need to properly provide care during this COVID-19 crisis. As you know, nurses who are being asked to care for COVID patients with adequate PPE are being punished, sometimes even suspended, for demanding the safety equipment they need to do their work. Now, this is a virus that becomes deadlier the higher the viral load. Nurses are getting extremely sick while caring for their patients. As I stand here before you, my heart is heavy when I tell you that at least 52 nurses in the United States have died from the COVID-19. How many of these nurses died because they did not have what they needed to protect themselves on the job? How many of these nurses died because they were running from one patient to another because there was not enough staff on their unit? And they became infected because there was no one to watch over them as they took off their infected equipment. As it stands today, healthcare in the United States is a system which dedicated, brave, and hardworking healthcare workers do all they can to provide the best care for their patients. Yet the system is designed to make it hard for patients to get the care they need and treat nurses as expendable commodities. But here is the thing. It doesn't have to be this way. We know that all these problems can be fixed by restructuring our healthcare system. While Medicare for All won't fix every single problem that comes with our efforts to fight this virus, we know that it would help us better prepare for whatever is coming next and to keep people safe and healthy. A Medicare for All system would cover everybody in this country with a comprehensive, high-quality care, making sure that everyone who gets sick can see a doctor. This is necessary if we are going to implement the testing and tracking policies to keep this pandemic under control. Medicare for All will allow us to offer any vaccine developed to everybody in this country with no cost sharing whatsoever. It will do that because when you have a government as a single payer, you have a system with the negotiating power needed to command the lowest possible drug prices. The government will be empowered to negotiate much lower prices for vaccines and drugs than an individual insurance company. Medicare for All will permanently delink health care from workplace, not only protecting people who lose their job and ensuring they can get health care, but also freeing up money spent by employers and workers on premiums to go for things like better wages and benefits and other workplace protections. Medicare for All will change the way we reimburse hospitals, replacing the confusion and inefficient mix of multiple public and private payers with a single publicly financed payer that can ensure that hospitals have money they need to stay open. A publicly financed system that ensures that money is actually used for patient care, workplace safety, and increasing capacity rather than lining the pockets of executives. When we move to a public financing of hospitals, we can move away from the just-in-time supply chain model. We can make sure that there are enough stockpiles of PPE and other necessary equipment to handle emergencies like this. We can prioritize the health and safety of nurses and other frontline care workers, as well as their patients, over the profit of these hospital executives. A better, more fair, and just system is out there, and the nurses are committed as ever to putting an end to the unjust and inhumane, profit-driven healthcare system we currently have. We can protect patients and their caregivers. We can move to a more just and humane healthcare system that prioritizes public health and wellness of all patients ahead of profits for a few. And the way we can do it is with Medicare for all. And thank you so much for letting me speak.
And thank you so much, Malinda, for being here, and thanks to all the nurses that are doing so much out there. We have time for a couple of questions, and we had some great questions if you're all right answering, or see if you can answer a couple of those. One question was around the Governor's Commission on Healthcare for All.
Mm-hmm.
It's been on a hiatus since the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where that is at right now? Is it going to start back up again? Do you have?
Honestly, I'm sorry, I don't know where it's at, but you know, I would imagine that it would start back up because, you know, we need to have a discussion of this, what's happening in our country and in California. But, you know, we definitely need a Medicare for all system, and that's what the nurses are continuing to work for with all our groups that are working with us together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And one other question that came up was around mental health services. I'm wondering if there are telehealth mental health services, and is it a national program, or is it, how do people access that? Do you have any information on that?
I don't, but you know, somehow I can get those answers. I'm sure in California, we must have something because it's much needed. I mean, our, you know, but as far as federally, honestly, I don't know what they have, you know, with the current person we have, but we must have that available for the people in California, and I could definitely find out for you. And at some point, I don't know how we would get it to the people that are on this call, but I think that's a very important question.
Yeah. Well, just so everyone knows, I will be posting a link on the SBPA's website, as well as California Progressive Alliance's website, with all the notes, links, resources. So anything you missed today or you want to find out more information on, I will have that available. Try to get that on there by Monday. Let's see, we have a few more minutes, Melinda. There was the questions around the action that's happening on May 1st, what that will look like since all the social distancing.
Yeah, this is probably our fourth one that we do, and I want to assure people that we are keeping the social distancing of 6 feet or more. We do wear our masks, we wear our gloves, but this is really critical to, you know, try to turn back what regional and HCA wants to do, because they're very serious about this. They do not have any concern about the community that they should be serving. They are unfortunately just concerned about their profits, and this is something that can't happen. And we have been really fortunate to have community people coming to the meetings. We have elected officials coming to the meetings. We are asking people to write letters, and we can get that information for you. I'm sure we'll put it on our the South Bay Progressive Alliance website.
Mm-hmm.
We just need to not let HCA do this to our communities. They need to have that hospital, a maternal child, open there for that community. It's just sinful, and they have made billions of dollars and they can actually afford to keep it open and really show some responsibility to that community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And it starts at 3:45, and it's really important to have people there because the press is actually paying attention to what HCA is doing.
Do you, just last little bit, do you see this happening statewide or nationwide, similar things with these for-profit hospitals?
Well, that's a good, HCA, this is what they do. They buy hospitals that, well, two reasons. They buy hospitals that are their competitor. They buy them so they can, have the market. They buy areas, hospitals, and then they close them down. They did that to San Jose Medical Center. They closed it down. They've done it with hospitals in Texas and in Florida. What they do is they purchase them, they close down units like they did here in maternal child in Texas. Then they say, that they don't have the patients. Although I will say at regional medical center, the nurses are telling us that they average about 5 to 6 births a day. So the community does need that, but HCA is good about buying hospitals, closing units down, and then closing the hospitals down.
Absolutely. Yeah. Profit over people.
Mm-hmm.
It's too bad. Well, thank you so much for doing that. One person asked, what does HCA stand for again?
Hospital Corporations of America. They are the richest and wealthiest and largest for-profit corporation in the United States, and I would probably say they're in the world.
Yeah, I had a statistic here that United Health Group just announced they got $160 million in profit in their first quarter of 2020. Yeah, it's just too bad. But we really appreciate all the hard work you're doing, and just please keep us in the loop with anything we can do to support you and the nurses.
I will. Thank you so very much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Melinda. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. And that was a really great report from Malinda and lots of great information. Again, we'll make sure that you have access to all of that information and it'll be available on our websites. You can also email us if you want us to send it to you directly. So thanks again for being here, Malinda. And next up, we have, let me pull up our agenda. So next up, we have a local poet and teacher. Asha is going to join us and share some of her work with us. Asha, are you?
Hey, yeah, thank you.
Hey.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you, Malinda, to all the work that y'all are continuing to do. The community is here and supports you for sure. I'm going to share just a piece with you. Yeah, thank you again for having me. Did you hear it? A faint whisper of a scream there beyond moving lights and luxury apartments. Silences of generations enclaved into extinction, like diminishing reservations, we always forget to pay homage to the indigenous. Before telephone wires narrowed our ability to listen, crosshairs designed for targeting practice. Ohlone ancestors saw futures cemented with every mortared brick. Slowly erased at exponential rates, the race found rats to experiment upon, which raises questions like how come certain races have been removed from being human? And if you roll down the window and slowly escape, you can smell lost traditions and monoculture capitalist patriarchy extinguishing flames of ancestry. Oils once seeped and saturated, essentially bought, prepackaged, redistributed, and colonized into a new name that still holds on to remnants of sense once familiar, but now too expensive to nourish roots of posterity. Forgotten fragrances that carries healing powers of thousands of years before food was redefined as without and needing to be whole. It's in plain sight, but blinded by assumption. Somehow glares reflected, defeated mythical entities entitled with a privileged sense of space, manifesting a destiny never designed to see justice. never intended to show equity. Slowly, somehow like quicksand smothering a chance at a glimpse of hope at a peak of the fall of imperialism, this mysticism that housing bubbles will burst neglects to balance opportunity and exploitation. Here, in San Jose, you can taste iron-rich culture hemorrhaging from wounds inflicted by barricades and raised rent prices, perpetuating cycles of disparity. Hemophilic without means to stop the bleeding out of resources from the community. The disease of gentrification lingers in the mouth, bitter and without restraint, one microchip challenge at a time, burning all traces of buds once sprouted with promise, numb and normalized sweet formations of tongue now in resistance, now foreign, fragmented and salty as products of conglomerate experiences. American dreams, now out of touch. Feeling the rejection of lost opportunity, reaching for stars and finding dust, remnants of royalty now dwindled into spores. Colonized lungs, sporadic pockets of people of color contaminating, cookie cutter like lines, lost, confused, and without place. And look, despite being desensitized, we still feel it all. Generational trauma triggered by gentrified memories. Houses no longer homes, and people no longer local. Agency no longer ours. Spectators passing by blurring lines of Googled communication. Think of how many stories we may never hear. How roses cannot smell if no one stops to ask why they stopped growing, or who planted them in the first place. It is our job to make sure the stories are heard, that our voices are not drowned out by status-driven quotas questioning everything but what the community needs. What we don't need is Google. Thank you.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Asha. I really appreciate that. It's great. We'll get one more from you in a little while, and we'll be looking forward to that. Thank you for being here with us and sharing your art. So I'm going to pass it over at this time to my good friend Jake Tonkel, who's going to introduce our next speaker. They'll be talking about the housing crisis. So Jake, are you ready in there?
Hey.
Take it on.
So I'm excited to introduce someone that I've built a friendship with over the last year or so. Tran is a former South Bay Progressive Alliance endorsed candidate for San Jose City Council. We're excited to have him back. He is a partner at the Justice at Work Law Group, a firm that's focused on rights for workers and social justice. He's also former president and current board member of the Vietnamese American Roundtable, and a very responsible leader in the Unhoused Response Group, which is getting information and COVID protection to those that are unhoused right now in our community. So with that, I will turn it over to Hui.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and definitely appreciate the opportunity and very much appreciated the support in the last election. We didn't get the results we wanted, but the fight continues, right? And there's a lot to work on, especially around issues of housing. Now, I also want to do a quick shout out to Peggy Elwell and to Brenda Zendejas, who came out and helped us out a lot in the campaign. Moving on to the topic, I want to make sure that we focus today actually on the unhoused specifically. Right, California has a massive homeless population here, right? 151,000 people. In Santa Clara County alone, there are 10,000 people who are unhoused on any given moment. Now, I want to focus in on the unhoused here because this has particular significance as we are dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Before the pandemic hit, it was common to run into people who, will ask, why do we care about folks living on the streets, right? And a lot of people kind of carry this belief in lift yourself up by the bootstraps kind of thing, not recognizing that homelessness has many causes that are beyond the control of people who are living in the streets. And even if people make decisions that lead to it, we have to live in a compassionate society that tries to help and bring and uplift everybody who lives among us. Now, the reason why COVID-19 though poses an additional risk during this time period for the unhoused is because of how infectious it moves, how infectious it is, and the risk that is present for people who cannot stay in one place if they're going to look for food, if they're going to try to find some financial resources, if they need water or to bathe or get medical care, right? While all of us are sheltering in place because of the shelter in place order, what do you do if you have no shelter? And that's what we've actually been trying to do with URGE. Now, taking a step back and focusing on this from a higher level point of view, obviously the need here to solve homelessness in the long term is housing, right? We've got to provide affordable housing. We've got to provide stable housing for people who are living on the streets, because the one consistent thing that we know about homelessness is that whatever caused it in the first place, once you're on the streets, it gets worse. If it's mental health issues, if it's if it's domestic violence, right? Whatever the cause may be that push people out into the streets, it is very difficult to find solutions for that while you're still homeless. Now, in how this applies to the COVID-19 pandemic, though, is that right now we really need to find ways to isolate and stabilize the housing situation for the unhoused, because the biggest concern during this pandemic right now is that if so many people get sick and need intensive medical care, they end up in the hospitals, and we don't have the capacity in our healthcare system to take advantage of that. Well, looking just in Santa Clara County alone, where we have 10,000 people who are unhoused, if an outbreak hits the camps, where some camps can grow as large as 200, 300 people, if there is a massive outbreak that hits these camps and everyone lives next to each other for support, for the sense of community, and for the bonds of relationship and community, well, that is where one of the biggest risk factors for our healthcare system is. And that's setting aside the fact that we need to also keep in mind that we're trying to protect everybody in the state and not just people who already have homes. So there's a reason, though. Now, we hear the announcements, though, that Governor Newsom has talked about securing thousands of motel rooms across the state. Now, that's a great announcement. And of course, I was excited as well when I heard it. The big question mark has been, where are they? In Santa Clara County, we have many people who live on the streets. And many folks right now are particularly at risk because they're older people who are living in the streets. They have underlying respiratory issues, or they're suffering from some other condition that makes them particularly vulnerable to the more harmful effects of COVID-19. Now, while we have pushed to try to get people into while there have been a lot of advocacy to try to push to get more motels open, we have not seen that really happen. And there are still thousands of people living in the streets right now. Now, some folks may think that shelters are a better option or a viable option. But if some of you are seeing what's happening in San Francisco, when an outbreak hits a shelter, that spreads incredibly quickly. Shelters are not known for giving people individual spaces or providing the ability to quarantine. So if a virus actually hits into any of the shelters, that is another way for that virus to spread very rapidly and very quickly. So down here in Santa Clara County, I'm part of a group called the Unhoused Response Group. We work in collaboration with many other great advocates, Sandy Perry from the Affordable Housing Network, Phil Mastrocola from Grace Baptist Church, many other folks here, to try to serve the unhoused community right now by providing some basic, simple supplies. But we've also been communicating with local officials to find out what happened to the promises of motels. And that's one of the things that up and down the state, wherever you are located, that is something that we need to make sure that we push for. Beyond just helping us through the COVID-19 pandemic now, there's been talk about this being a transition into a longer-term, broader strategy to house the homeless. And so we need to put pressure on that. So right now, our focus is on local. Talk to your folks in your local county or city to see if what supply of motel rooms there are that can be used to house the homeless, and how do you get people in there. Now, the other thing that we're doing, though, and this is, and fully to admit that I'm fully ready to admit this, that what we're doing in terms of providing a stopgap measure is that our group, URGE, the Unhoused Response Group, we have been working to provide supply kits to the homeless. That includes the key essential items that are important for everything, for what we want to hand out, right? And there's 3 main items. It's hand sanitizer, it's face masks, and it's information. As we have found through the people who volunteer with us and through the unhoused advocates here who spend a lot of time in the camps, we've heard that there are many people who didn't even know that a pandemic was happening. They didn't know that there was this extra health risk going on right now. So we created this group because we thought that the number one thing that we needed to do when the shelter-in-place order started was to make sure that everybody was on the same page. Jake has been a huge part of this crew. He helps lead one of the packing teams. And what we do is we put together the information, the hand sanitizer, and the mask together, and anything else that we can supply. Food, clothes, some medical equipment. As long as we get those donations rolling, we can get them out. We've been able to build an operation that has produced 200 to 250, sometimes 300 packs a week, and they are distributed from the moment they're done. Now, this is a huge need because right now, restaurants are closed, libraries are closed. Many of the public spaces that are normally available to the unhoused for them to go to get some water, wash their hands, wash their face, charge their phone, these places are no longer accessible. And they're still wandering, looking for basic resources. So if you don't have food, if you can't charge your phone, if you can't do the basics that we take advantage of every day, you're going to wander. And the shelter-in-place order was put into place specifically to prevent that, to keep people from minimizing those non-essential trips. We're doing the best that we can to supply unhoused communities with food, with basic supplies that can allow them to stay in place. And if they do have to go and travel, which many do, and there's very little that we can do to stop that, then they at least practice the kind of habits that are keeping all of us healthy. Now, where we're asking for help is, again, on a high level, to communicate with people in your county and find out where these motel rooms are and how we can get people into those rooms, because we need to use that to protect the healthcare system, to protect the unhoused, and to work for all of our collective health and well-being. But if you're also so inclined, URGE is still working. We have relied completely on donations and volunteers. If you're based in Santa Clara County, based in San Jose, and you got some time and you want to lend a helping hand, we can always use your help. And if you have the resources, or if you can't help but you want to donate and support in some other way, I sent in some information to Nick already. We're hoping to get some support from anywhere we can right now just to get those basics going: food, hand sanitizer, and face masks. And I'll be here for any questions if you have.
Thank you so much, Wei, for all that. And thank you for everything you're doing for our community. An incredible, incredible advocate for the homeless population here. Peggy, are you there? So I will definitely make sure, and if you want to, you can also post any of your links that you'd like to in the chat box. But I will be including those in our resources page as well. So people also have access to them there. So, but thank you once again.
And thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Appreciate that. Hello there.
Hi.
Mike, I'm gonna mute you for now. We're gonna finish and I'll call on you in just a short while.
Yeah, but speak loud, please.
Okay, thank you very much for being with us.
Of course.
All right, next up we have, well, Peggy, are you gonna introduce our next speaker?
Yes. Our next 2 speakers are from Silicon Valley DeBug, which is a community organizing advocacy and multimedia storytelling organization that was started in 2001. Our guests are Christine Clifford and Sarait Escorza, who will be speaking on the coronavirus issues in jails and ICE detention centers. Christine helps lead participatory defense work with a focus around local jails and ending the life without possibility of parole extreme sentence. Sarait Escorza is the Participatory Defense National Training Co-Coordinator. She's a a lead on immigration work, and also leads the San Mateo County Participatory Defense Hub. So I'm just gonna let them go with it. Welcome, Christine and Sarait.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Hi, I'm Christine Clifford from Silicon Valley DeBug, and thanks for having us here today. I just want to spend a little time talking about COVID inside of our facilities and our jails. As you can imagine, it's an area of great concern, especially for those of us who have loved ones inside. But for the community as a whole, we need to be very concerned about what goes on in this highly congregate setting of our jails. Jeff Smith, who is our county executive, said the other day that the greatest area of infection and death rate in our county is found in Latinx males, which is over 50% of our jail. And we can discuss the reasons why there's such a disparate population in the jail some other time. But it's a very, it's like living in a petri dish inside of our jails. So Silicon Valley DeBug has tried to zero in on 3 different areas regarding the jails. One is how to get more people released during COVID. The other is how to help people who remain in our facilities. And the other is how to help people once they're released. So as you can imagine, the jail being a very congregate setting, there is no ability to do social distancing. It's very difficult to keep yourself clean. It's very difficult to make sure the areas are sanitized. There is a lot of shared spaces such as showers and telephones. There is a lot of shared equipment such as handcuffs, transportation in vans, sitting and holding cells. So having the jails be not only safe for the detainees, but safe for staff is a huge area of concern. So one of the great things that people have been working on is to, and the county in particular, wanted to help reduce the number of people that are inside of our facilities. So they've released a great number of people. This was based on the level of their charges and their health and a few other things, which later down the line we should all take a look at. If it was safe to release all these people into the community, why were they in the jail in the first place? But that being said, a lot of people were released into the community with little or no preparation for their release. So a lot of people came out. We were getting phone calls in the middle of the night. We have some other partners who work with us and other agencies who were getting calls from people that were being released. There was no planning for their release. There was nowhere for them to go. They had no supplies, no housing, no help in planning. So if you go to Silicon Valley's website, it's called, and I gave it to, it's going to be in your resources. It's called Day in California Court. You can hear testimonies of people that are still inside and testimonies of people who were released. And you can see sort of a chronology of what happened once COVID hit and people began to be released. But currently, what DeBug is doing is working on trying to get more people released. They've released something like 20% of the population. And that's work with the district attorney, and that's work with the public defender's office and the courts to try and encourage even more releases than they've already made to reduce the population inside. That being said, before people are released or once they're released, we want to make sure the county is providing adequate resources and planning for them, which didn't happen, at least in the beginning. The Reentry Resource Center is closed. So people were coming out and maybe finding their way over there and finding no resources. They now have a table of resources out there and someone to answer questions, but things like getting public assistance is all done over the phone, getting medical care, that kind of thing. So we want to encourage the reopening of the reentry center and increase the amount of services that are given to people before they're even released, identifying who you're going to let out and making sure they have a place to go and that they have adequate resources. For the people inside, we asked public health to go out and take a look at the facilities, and they did, and found several things that they wanted to encourage to change, such as masks on the guards and the cleanliness of some areas. but we want to increase public health oversight of those facilities. We're asking for someone to be sort of embedded in the facilities from public health, or we want unannounced inspections of the facilities. When the public health officer came for a tour of the jails, they were escorted and of course shown the better places. But again, from the recordings that we get and the phone calls that we get from people inside and people released, what they're reporting and what they're seeing can be very different than what we're hearing from the sheriff's department. So we want to make sure that people's needs are being met, and we want to make sure that this large congregate setting, just like nursing homes, just like any place where you have a lot of people forced to live in a congregate setting, is overseen well by public health. So those are the things that we've been asking for. And again, we have some resources that were given that you can look up. Supervisor Ellenberg has been instrumental on the Board of Supervisors in getting public health to go out to the jails, contacting her and contacting public health and encouraging them to stay on top of the jails, in addition to contacting the district attorney and the public defender's office and asking them to stay on top of releases, and asking the reentry center and the Board of Supervisors to open the reentry center and make sure people are given adequate resources before they're released are the three things that we're looking for. And those resources and email addresses were given. So we may also be having a car rally to ask for support for these three areas. And if that happens, we'll let you know and ask you to come and join us. So that's sort of it for the jails. And so I'll turn it over to Sarah to talk about ICE.
Thank you, Christine, for talking about what's going on in Santa Clara. We're also doing similar efforts in San Mateo. But I do want to talk about what's going on in regards to immigration, because that's also another area where Silicon Valley DeBug has been very involved, especially working with families through our participatory defense model and helping support families who have loved ones, going through the criminal court process, but as well as immigration court processes. And so you may be aware that, Santa Clara has the strongest policy, not just in the state, but also in the nation. So we haven't been familiar as to, if there happening any arrests in Santa Clara, but that's not the case in other counties such as San Mateo, which is not that far away from San Jose. So in our county, we have been organizing around stopping the transfers of people from county jails to ICE. Our sheriff, Carlos Bolaños, despite this pandemic, still chooses to use his discretion to turn people over to ICE. Based on, the state legislation, SB 54. So we have been very active here in San Mateo through the similar efforts around the jail. We just had a car rally this week on Wednesday where we pressured the sheriff to stop collaborating with ICE because we all know that, just like the situations that are in our county jails where, people are hiding in more risk due to this pandemic, we're also ensuring that collaboration doesn't happen in San Mateo. And it's not just in San Mateo, it's also happening in other counties throughout the state. So there's efforts that are happening. And through the work that we're doing, we actually have a family whose loved one was transferred from the San Mateo County local jail, Maguire. And their loved one is currently sitting at the ICE processing center in Aurora, Colorado, after the facility in Richmond was shut down. So we're working closely with this mother. We also put out a video and we could share the link as well for that video because this mother, her son has asthma. So, he also falls within, those criteria where, his immune system is critical and then the asthma doesn't make it any better. So we're working with her across states, to ensure that her loved one is released from Aurora, Colorado detention facility. So, that's part of the efforts that we're doing. There's also hunger strikes that are happening all throughout California in different ICE detention centers, such as Mesa Verde in Bakersfield, Adelanto, Otay. there's people who are organizing inside the detention centers to ask for basic necessities, what's essential, mask, soap, you know, those kind of necessities that should be available to them during this pandemic. But it's not happening because, as we know, ICE and, you know, the jails aren't fit to do that and don't care about, you know, our loved ones' safety or health and livelihood. So people are organizing in there. So we know that there's an attorney through Pangea who's working with the family whose loved one is currently in Mesa Verde, and he's participating in the hunger strike to push simple demands that, you know, ask for the release of people who are vulnerable, that ask for basic necessities, you know, sanitizing products, and essentially also called for a stop of transferring of people from local county jails to ICE. So that's kind of what's happening. We also know that there's litigation that's happening through ACLU. There's the immigrant defense advocates who's filing an amicus brief as well, so that we push for the halting of all the transfers here in California and across the state. So that's kind of what we've been working on and supporting all those efforts.
Thank you both so much for all that you're doing and for those updates. We definitely want to make sure people get connected, and if they're in the Santa Clara area, definitely connecting with you guys and helping with the great work you all doing. I think we need to keep going, but we will post all of your links and everything in our resources page. So thanks again so much for being here and for all you guys are doing. Okay, so next up, we are going to get one more piece from Asha. She's going to share another piece of her work with us. So Asha, when you're ready, come on in.
Right on, thanks. And shouts to DeBug. I love y'all and I appreciate everything that y'all are always doing, for real. Just because she's here and I get to put her on blast a little bit, I wrote this piece largely for myself, but I'm constantly inspired by the people I'm working with and I'm around. I've been a K-8 public school teacher for the last 9 years and organizer, activist before that. And one of the wonderful women that I've met along the way has been Shay. And so I just want to dedicate this one to you. You already know what it is. But yeah, thank you again. If you want to know more about me, I'm fortunate enough to say that a TED Talk that I did on my identity and my artistry was just released. So if you like Google, I wish I could say something else, right, based off of that poem. But if you search up Asha and TED Talk, you'll come across it. Let me know what you think. Appreciate it. She walked, knowing they would question intentions, driven into mass distraction and deception. She walked, knowing they are terrified of her coming up on their heels, the feeling of knowing she's always had to run twice as fast, nevertheless, she persisted. She walked, knowing her body, her very existence is perceived as a threat, knowing that her indigenous skin has had to justify its claim to be deserving of a home. Colonized, displaced, but still rooted in ancestral soil. She spoke, knowing her place would never be handed to her, never given a seat at the table, so she would have to make it. Take it if she had to, but she wouldn't be silenced anymore. She spoke, knowing others would have to stop speaking for her, claiming stories instead of speaking truth, because since a youth, those in power have chosen to fabricate narratives, and she's tired of seeing her community be erased before her eyes. She spoke, knowing so many have been silenced. She's unapologetic, knowing the hair on her knuckles is ancestral gifted wisdom, not another reason to conform, not sorry for clapbacks because entitlements have allowed fingers to run through foreign hair without permission. unapologetic, disappointed but not surprised, knowing in 2019 over 50 unarmed people were murdered by the police, that over 300 trans people were murdered in the streets, that white supremacy is on the rise from shadows behind familiar faces. She is unapologetic because she is tired of having to apologize. They are tired of having to apologize. They are unapologetic, knowing pronouns are trivial until abusive. That a woman is not defined by genitalia. Unapologetic, knowing that binaries are for the past, and in order to preserve the future, dignity and humanity should not be treated as a privileged present. Compassion is not a gift, nor can it be plagiarized. You see, she knew even if she had to do it alone, she would. She would sing when others would say silence. Music of resiliency would find sanity and speak when she had no voice. Calling her to decide between justice and love, between any means necessary and complacency, but what the ignorant always fail to recognize is that the most romantic are always the most revolutionary. Thank you, y'all. I appreciate you. Much love.
Thank you, Asha. Amazing, amazing stuff, and we appreciate you. So, up next, we have some of our wonderful young activists. As most of you know, we just 50th anniversary of Earth Day, and around the world, young people have been organizing climate strikes and different climate actions. We have two young, wonderful activists here with us to kind of summarize what actions they've been taking over the past few days around the climate and tell us some of the lessons they've learned and what their next steps are and how we can support them. So our next two speakers are Helen and Jamie. So if you guys are...
Hi everyone, my name is Helen and I'm a co-lead of Silicon Valley Youth Climate Strike. Thank you for the introduction. And I guess I'll just talk about what we have done this past week for Earth Week. So we started off with Earth Day, and we had a really great celebration of Earth Day with Green Foothills virtual webinar. Jamie, if you want to speak on that experience a little bit.
Sure, I'm Jamie. I'm also a co-lead of Silicon Valley Youth Climate Strikes. And we spoke about our new partnership with Green Foothills and the efforts about protecting Coyote Valley, in solidarity with the Protect Your Stat campaign. And we were honored to be joined by the man, Pete Mikowski, who started Earth Day 50 years ago. So it was a really great experience. Thank you if you joined that.
Yeah, so that was our first Earth Day event. And then Earth Week was 3 days of action. If you've heard of Earth Day Live, the first day is Earth Day, the second day is Thursday, which is divestment, and the third day is Friday, which is political action. So on Thursday, we were holding lots of teach-ins with California Youth Climate Strike. I think there's a couple, shout out to Tiffany, who is with California Youth Climate Strike on this call. So we organized a lot of teach-ins, such as like capitalism and the climate crisis, / eco-socialism, COVID-19 versus the climate crisis, divest and decarcerate, saving the future, why we care about the earth, impact on and solutions from indigenous peoples, and environmental justice and voting rights. So those were some of our amazing teach-ins that we did throughout Thursday and Friday. And then we also had a cool webinar that included a conversation with Shahid Buttar, who's running to replace Nancy Pelosi in her seat in Congress. And that was also a really interesting webinar, and we will have recordings up on the website soon, and we have a lot of action steps that we want to take. But before we get into that, Jamie, do you want to talk about the fireside chats?
Sure, yeah. With California Youth Climate Strikes, we've been working a lot on these fireside chats, sort of emanating what FDR used to do with, chats with the country. So we're having some live streams on the California Youth Climate Strike Instagram. So if you're interested in that, we can, after this, drop in the chat the how to join onto that so you can see future fireside chats. But on Tuesday, we had a chat about epidemiology and the links to, future disease issues regarding what will happen, when climate crisis worsens and that leads to future disease. On Wednesday, we had a fireside chat about immigration and solidarity with undocumented activists. On Thursday, we had a fireside chat about how to be allies with Indigenous people in solidarity with them in your climate activism. And on Friday, I was on a live stream or a fireside chat about lessons that we can learn from this pandemic, translating to combating the climate crisis and bringing about solutions like the Green New Deal that can both tackle economic disparity and economic issues caused by COVID and the climate crisis at the same time. So that's what we're doing with fireside chats. And we will have some in the future. Sorry, Helen. We will have some more fireside chats in the future. So if you have any recommendations for subjects to talk about, please drop them in the chat so we can hear from what you want to hear about. We're looking at talking about mental health, mutual aid, people's bailout, stuff like that. So definitely let us know.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for talking about fireside chats. I see someone's suggestion already. Interesting. So I also wanted to talk about CAYCS's action steps. Silicon Valley Youth Climate Strike is going to be organizing with the California statewide chapter going on forth since the pandemic is bringing us all together. Localized actions and like organizing geographically doesn't really make sense now that everything's online. So we're just going to connect with our statewide chapter and build those connections. So some things we want to work on in the future internally with our org is like outreach, recruiting new youth organizers to get involved now that now that people might be kind of lost as to like what direction they want to go in. Now that the pandemic has changed everyone's activities, we could bring in new organizers into the climate movement. And also, with Earth Day, maybe people are inspired to join us. So we want to recruit new youth organizers. We also want to get all the resources from our teach-ins up. So we kind of just compiled a ton of educational resources on these really, really interesting topics, all into like 3 days of action. So we want to, not everyone could make it to those webinars and teach-ins. So we're getting the webinars up and recorded online so that we can keep watching them and sharing them and learning from them for lots of time going on. And then internally, we want to restructure, build new partnerships and have maybe a horizontal structure. And then also we're working on, that like resources thing online for reading, watching, like organizations to check out, which a lot of our webinars had action steps like that. Like, for example, the teach-in I was hosting with some of the Mutsun tribal youth, we were talking about Protect Your Stack. So we had a lot of resources for organizations to check out regarding that. And also, just all the teach-ins had really cool action steps of what to learn from, what to keep on, what organizations to keep researching if you want to get involved with, like, example, like one of them was like missing murdered Indigenous women, and there were organizations that you could get involved with if you want to advocate for those laws. And then, we just want to get everyone connected because inside of our organization, we want to get people statewide to actually begin organizing together as we adjust to this pandemic. And we want to also do outreach to organizations such as California Progressive Alliance to keep on working together in the future. And Jamie's going to talk about our other planned activities in the future.
Yeah, speaking of, standing in solidarity with our communities and working together, I'm planning some art plans because we're all stuck at home and there aren't really a lot of things we can do together in person. So we are working on an art takeover. We're planning a series of art builds online, which we can send more information about soon. They'll probably be in the evenings on Saturdays. And we will be having a series of these art builds so that people can build a lot of art talking about the Green New Deal, talking about climate solutions, and talking about the intersection between solutions to climate change and solutions to injustices brought about by the COVID-19 virus. So once we build up all of that art and, share as a community, we are going to take all that art to the streets. And when people are leaving their homes, once this quarantine is finally over, you will just see art everywhere talking about the solution to the problem. And we're hoping that's going to help energize the people to fight for change that we need. With that, we're working with the Palo Alto hub of Sunrise to do some street art. We're working on some spray painting with chalk art for the Green New Deal, especially on like rec trails because everyone's out walking right now. So just trying to get that messaging across, trying to get people thinking about the hope for the future. And speaking about hope for the future, I'm also working on, we're working on a national art contest and showcase of art of all kinds, visual art, drawing, painting, poetry, song, dance. And the prompt for this art contest is envisioning the future under a Green New Deal. And we are hoping that this contest is going to spread hope, show the country what it is we're actually fighting for. And we're hoping that it will inspire a lot of people who weren't involved with the climate movement to begin with to get involved. Because, the environmental groups tend to get a bad rap about being, doomsday, all about depressing stuff. And we want to show the world what it is we're actually fighting for, the hopeful future that, we want to bring about. And so that's what the art contest is all about. We can drop information about it in the chat, how to submit art, but I really encourage you all to join in and to spread the word among your organizations. We, like Helen said, want this to be horizontally spread through all sorts of grassroots movements in the country. And I'm hoping this is going to be a really big thing online and hopefully go viral and just draw a lot of attention to the environmental movement before it's too late. So thank you for having us today.
Thank you both for being here, and thank you for all the efforts you've been doing. I know you've been very busy over the past month organizing all these actions, and it's very exciting to see all that you're accomplishing, even with the large obstacles we have here with the pandemic and everything. But just congratulate you on all the efforts, and definitely we stand in solidarity with you moving forward. We definitely want to see this movement build. So we'll make sure and share all your links, so just let us know, and we'll make sure everyone gets a hold of those. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right, in the next portion of our event this afternoon, this is going to be member and ally announcements. So we have a number of members who have requested to give us a short update on what they're working on and some different information. So we're going to give them some time to do that. And then our final speaker, author and professor Mike Davis, will be joining us after the announcements in about 15 minutes. So our first announcement is from Jake Tonkel. Jake, you there?
Hey. So I just wanted to come on and give a big shout out and thank you to South Bay Progressive Alliance for all your support in my election. For those of you that don't know who I am, again, my name is Jake Tonkel, and I worked through South Bay Progressive Alliance for a while, mostly chairing our public banking action team, and we'll get to hear a little bit more about where public banking is across the state and across the nation later in just a few minutes. But back in July of 2019, I decided to run for San Jose City Council. I live in District 6, which is mostly consisting of the Alameda, Rose Garden, Bascom, and Willow Glen neighborhoods. So for those of you that know the city well, it's more of the west side. Decided to take on a fairly conservative incumbent for this seat. So it was a tough uphill battle, knowing that we were going to be outspent and that the viability of beating an incumbent is always challenging. So grateful to have, support from California Nurses Associations, California Progressive Alliance, South Bay Progressive Alliance, and we really built a strong coalition of progressive volunteers and supporters to make this happen. We were able to keep the incumbent underneath 50%, which means we are going into a runoff for November. It's 6 more months on the campaign trail for me, but very positive light moving forward, as over 50% of the district decided that the incumbent was not doing a good enough job to stay in that seat. Between myself and actually 2 other progressive challengers, we were able to show that the majority of the district does want progressive values to represent them at City Council. Last little plug, if you haven't gotten on our email list or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, everything is at Jake4D6, Jake the number 4, the letter D, the number 6. It's Jake4D6@gmail as well. So if you have other questions, you want to reach out and volunteer, we can use all the help we can get, knowing that we're probably going to be outspent 6 or 7 to 1 in the general election as well. But we are, again, excited that it's people that make the difference in these kind of local races. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jake. And yeah, just so people are aware, yes, Jake is one of our SBPA and CPA endorsed candidates, and we're always looking for good progressives around the state. So if you're looking to run, or someone we want to support you. Next up, we have Shay. Is Shay there?
Yep. Hey, this has been so much fun. I tell you, it's so nice to hear, especially all the reports for the young people. And as an environmentalist my entire life, it's really nice to hear so much work around making sure that people understand how to be climate smart, how the moving parts. So that was like really exciting. And then my homegirl, Asha, surprised me. So I'm glad that we closed our screens, because I was crying. I had to go upstairs and freshen up. So thank you, Asha. I got mad love for you, and DeBug and Jake, we're always with you. So anyways, I'm Shay Franco-Clausen. I was a former endorsed candidate by South Bay Progressives in their beginnings. And I came in a strong 3rd in my city council race, but then got a seat because the former person who represented the Open Space Authority was willing to step down and let me take her place. As a native of San Jose and have been in the environmental fight when I was voluntold as a child, it was really important for me to have a seat there. So I'm super excited. Today I want to talk to you because I'm a local elected official who serves on the Santa Clara County Democratic Party. And what a lot of people, even like myself until 2012, I had no idea how endorsements were done at the state party, at the local party. And it was something that was, I felt like kept from a lot of people. And I think me and Nick talked about it, like 2 years ago, and I thought today would be a great day just to put it on the radar while we're at home, to really start looking and planning for the ADEM elections that will be in January. And those weekends are going to be January 9th and 10th, January 23rd and 24th. What the ADEM elections is, Assembly District Elections Meeting, and this is when there's 80 state assembly districts, and all 80 of them, 7 self-identified male and self-identified women run as Democrats to represent the voice of the constituency. So like I was a ADEM my first time. I got top vote getter. It seemed to be a strategy I have. But to be able to have a voice in the endorsements, because I'm listening to everything that everyone is saying, it'd be great to have people that had these same views making those endorsements and having that vision for the Democratic Party, if you're Democrats. And as a progressive and a very independent Democrat who's obviously unapologetic, I really think the time is now for us to be organizing. We have until January. We're going to do, the end of January is when the last time you can file. And I'll give more information because this is really important. It's $30, and they even have fee waivers for you to run. But you have to be a registered Democrat. And the people who can vote for you have to be registered Democrats as well. But now they offer same day registration. But we will check to see if you were already formerly registered, because we had a lot of people coming and registering the day, but their Republicans want to be a Democrat, then go back to Republicans tomorrow. So they found a way to stop that. And I just wanted to say that being in the Democratic Party, and I just won my 4-year election as a Central Committee delegate, top voter again, but I was the only progressive on that slate of people who were running and winning, and I want to change that. So not only do I want to report out how important it is, January is around the corner before you know it. Please reach out to me if you have questions. I will help you with filing. I just want to see more people doing the work that are actually working with the people in the community representing these seats. It tends to be elected officials, staff, or certain people that kind of keep endorsements the same. Endorsements and who represents our party, it doesn't matter if it's independent, green, whatever, should be reflections of just that. So ADEM elections are every 2 years. So it's going to be 2021, 2023, so on and so on. And it will be 14 people elected, 7 women, 7 men from the Democratic Party to represent a voice in our assembly district. So I just wanted to put that on everyone's radar. I'm an organizer, and I think we should be organizing to find some younger voices. Like, I'm super excited to see the younger voices and some of those senior voices that, you know, have some aging in them, to have a little bit of history in the decisions we make, but, you know, sort of mentor and guide you through that. So again, ADEM elections, and if anyone has any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will give more for them to put out in the newsletter. And I will be putting it on my own Facebook page because it's so important that we have better representation.
Thank you so much, Shay, for being here. All right, next up we have Trinity to speak with us about public banking. Come on, Trinity. Oh, are you still, hold on.
Oh.
There we go.
There we go. I'm unmuted. Thank you. Thanks, Jake, and good to see you, Nick and Jake. You were both such a powerful help with their AB 857 bill. And just a brief, if any of you guys didn't know about the Public Banking Act, about 6 months ago in October, we passed AB 857, the Public Banking Act, which was extraordinary because it was an entirely grassroots, unfunded, all volunteer effort that challenged the Wall Street status quo. We took on the big banks and we won. We passed a bill, the Public Banking Act, that empowers California cities, counties, and regions to form their own banks, a bank owned by and accountable to the people that would not be able to invest in private prisons, immigrant detention centers, all the things that negatively impact our societies. A public bank, socially and environmentally responsible, with responsible mandates, would be able to reinvest in our community. So since the Governor Newsom signed our bill 6 months ago, we pivoted back to the local level to work with our city councils, our supervisors across the state of California to figure out how to roll out this public bank. And since then, the pandemic has happened. So we are now at such a critical moment to seize this narrative. This is such an incredible moment in history to fundamentally transform the financial system, because if we're looking at what's happening on the national level, all of these federal stimulus funding is now being used to prop up big businesses, big corporations, and Wall Street banks. Little people on Main Street, small and medium-sized businesses are getting impacted by this. So we just launched the National Public Banking Alliance. And our first action step is to petition Congress to use federal stimulus funding to capitalize public banks, to accelerate and roll out public banks across the state, both supporting regional, municipal and regional public banks, as well as state public banks. You know, this is our opportunity to be able to use the money that now sits in Wall Street to be able to serve underserved community, to help with the recovery process for our cities, to serve the underserved communities who have been shut out of Wall Street, to be able to use these stimulus funds to provide loans to small business who can't access them, to partner with community banks and credit unions so that they can offer low interest loans to ordinary folks. To build infrastructure, to create low-income housing. We have the potential now to completely transform the financial system, and this is our moment in history to do this. And this pandemic has created this global pause, and with every crisis, it presents an opportunity to transform the system. And that's why we're really excited about being able to capture the narrative on a national level, which was the reasons why we founded we just launched the National Public Banking Alliance to help advance the work that we're already doing here in California. So we created an extra network petition. I can drop the links in the chat, and I hope that Nick and SBA can also send that out to all of your members to sign. We just launched that last week, and we are asking Congress to explicitly add a line item in the next Care for Stimulus 4 Act to allow municipalities and states to utilize federal recovery funds to capitalize public banks, because at the end of the day, it's, we need public banks to empower the people, to empower Main Street rather than Wall Street. And that is a very simple and logical and irrefutable premise for public banking. It's about taking the power out of Wall Street and putting it in the hands of the people. So please sign our petition. We just launched the website publicbanking.us. It is very bare bones. Again, this is grassroots, but that hasn't stopped us from taking on Wall Street and winning at the California level. So we hope that we can utilize this moment to build energy around this public banking issue nationally. It's an issue that's public banks have existed for over a century in North Dakota, but across the U.S. it's relatively unknown. So we hope to be able to help spread the awareness about it and spread the energy and momentum there is against Wall Street and drive it towards a real and viable solution like public banks. Thanks.
Thank you so much for being here, Trinity.
Thank you.
With you and making all this happen, and so excited about AB 857 and the way things are going. Yeah, it's a very hopeful future. So thank you for doing
Thank you so much.
So I did post that the link for the petition in the chat, and we'll also have that in our mailer and in our resources list as well. So please take care, and
awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So I know we had further questions in the chat about public banking. We don't have time to get to them right now, but definitely if you're in the San Jose area, you can reach out to me regarding public banking questions. We do have a number of things going on at the Santa Clara County level. And, I can connect you with other people around the state if you're not in the San Jose area and want to get connected with the public banking movement. So thanks again, Trinity. And up next, we have Richard. Is Richard on with us? Let's see.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Richard. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Richard Hobbs, immigration attorney, executive director of Human Agenda, which has been an essential part of the South Bay Progressive Alliance since its beginning. I'm also chair of the Elections Action Team. I urge everyone who knows anyone in Jake Tonkel's district to please give me their name so that we can contact them and begin to develop neighborhood letters and support Jake's campaign. It's very important that Jake Tonkel win in November. I want to talk today about the Solo Solidarity Fund. The Solo Solidarity Fund was begun a month ago by Human Agenda. It is a solidarity organizing for Los Olvidados, the forgotten ones. The fund is set up to support immigrants, undocumented immigrants in Santa Clara County that basically fall into three conditions. Number one, they're a resident of the county. Number two, they are currently in removal proceedings and deportation proceedings or have a loved one in ICE detention. And number three, they've been impacted by the coronavirus. We interviewed about 60 people last weekend who are all undocumented and in deportation proceedings. And we found that about 2/3 have lost their jobs. And so this is a very vulnerable group. None of them and their family receive any stimulus money. None of them are eligible for any federal fiscal relief. None of them are eligible for any unemployment insurance. So we know that this group is one of the most vulnerable in the county and throughout the state. To date, we have raised about $23,000. There have been a number of donors that we thank from the South Bay Progressive Alliance, including Rob Means, the co-chair. We are now organized into 5 volunteer teams: a fundraising team, outreach team, interview team, verification team, and fiscal team. We're grassroots, we're non-corporate, we're locally organized, and we're asking you to support this fund. You can go to humanagenda.net to make a contribution. And we're also looking for volunteers to serve on those committees. Our goal is to reach $100,000 and then make a decision whether or not to continue beyond that. Recently, we gave out $500 to a Salvadoran woman whose 2 children, 12 and 14, were detained by ICE in Otay. And she drove to Otay all the way from San Jose, picked them up, and now I'm happy to say that they are living with her. However, they do not have a computer in their house, for example. They only have 1 set of clothing, and the $500 that we delivered to her will be a beginning of support for her and her family. So I urge everyone to please support undocumented immigrants that are currently being deported and have been dramatically impacted by coronavirus. You can donate at humanagenda.net.
Thank you so much, Richard. I did put a link in the chat for people that are interested in making a donation. And thanks again for everything you do, Richard. Next up, we have Claudia Rossi. She's the Santa Clara County School Board President. Claudia, are you with us?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Wonderful. What a beautiful way to spend a Saturday afternoon. I am so moved and just so grateful for all of you and the work that you undertake. Certainly these times expose us to the best of our community and unfortunately the worst. And I want to take this opportunity to alert all of you to the opportunity that the school privatizers are seizing upon as students are sheltering in place and connecting to their education online. I am very concerned that the rocket ship CMOs and other charter schools that rely heavily on screen time for their students are now seizing on this opportunity to expand outreach to families in the community. When we do, and we will eventually return our children to their classrooms, the most beneficial educational program is to have a highly qualified teacher in front of the classroom providing instruction. And so I want to take this opportunity to alert the community because a few things are happening. There are boards that have relaxed procurement oversight. So you have ed tech companies that are aggressively marketing online learning at this time. And so we could have a situation where school district leaders purchase these online learning packages. And I think that that is something that we really need to be vigilant about. The charter school movement is also stoking discontent, and primarily in the Latino community, to further recruit students for charter school expansion. And so while at these times, as we are doing right now, we are relying on online systems to remain connected, when students go back to their schools, again, the best education for a young person is the human contact and relationship with teachers and other educators. So I just kind of want to put the word out. There is an organization that has been formed, Backpacks, and they are an organization that is providing education for the community to be alerted to the tactics of the school privatizing movement, which is a land grab movement. And it's a movement to also do away with elected boards. It's a movement aimed to also attack teachers' unions. So we want to make sure that all of you know that this opportunity that charter schools have at this time, that children are in their homes, and this push for online learning is, if we're not careful, something that could result in, I think, the move to make commodities of our students. I remind you that our communities of color throughout the nation tend to have charter schools that bring students in. They keep them in very small, confined campuses. The land and the buildings that house these students are not owned by all of us. They're privately held. So I just want to kind of, and I know I'm over my time, but I want to alert all of you to be very vigilant and to reach out to your board members to share your concerns about this. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, Claudia, and bringing that to everyone's attention, because as a teacher, I've seen this as well. And there's a lot of uncertainty in education right now. And like most industries, there's profiteers out there looking to make money off of this crisis. And it is that disaster capitalism at its best. So thank you for being vigilant on that and alerting us all. One last thing on education is Schools and Communities First initiative. We did get the signatures to get on our November ballot, so please educate yourselves on that. It's an important issue to reform Prop 13. We could have a whole nother discussion on that. We have just a couple more, and then we're going to get to author and professor Mike Davis in just a moment here. So next up, we have Khalid. If I pronounce your name right, I'm sorry if I don't. But from One Fair Wage, and One Fair Wage has an emergency fund. They've been providing money for families as well. So Khalid, if you're here.
Hello. Thank you, Nick. And first off, I just want to send everybody on this panel, on this call, so much gratitude, because thank you. I mean, just thank you for stepping up, making trouble, and helping people. My name is Khalid. I work with Saru Jayaraman at One Fair Wage, and I just want to provide a quick 2-minute update about the state of the restaurant industry, the state of the service sector, and what we've been doing over the past month. So COVID-19 has really exposed the structural inequities underpinning the service sector, and it has created an opportunity to organize workers and employers for change that is long overdue. So just to give you a sense of the scale of the sector, there are 13 million restaurant workers and nearly 6 million tipped workers across the country who were already struggling to get by before the pandemic because of the power and influence of the National Restaurant Association, which has lobbied literally since emancipation to sustain a federal sub-minimum wage that is now set at $2.13 an hour. So as of this week, we estimate that between 4.5 and 9 million tipped workers have lost their jobs. Many of these workers are ineligible for unemployment insurance because their wages were so low that they did not meet the minimum threshold needed to qualify for benefits. And so millions and millions of workers, tipped workers, are now finding themselves unable to pay for rent, for food and other basic needs. So in response, One Fair Wage, the organization I work for, set up an emergency relief fund on Monday, March 16th to provide tipped workers with direct cash relief. And over the past month, we've received applications from over 150,000 people. We've raised $17 million, and we've built an army of almost 1,000 volunteers who are calling each worker to screen them, to hear from them, and ultimately to organize and to integrate them into our movement for one fair wage, which is a movement to establish a full minimum wage with tips on top for all workers in all 50 states. And one thing that I want to mention is that we're not just stopping there. This moment has shown that we can both support workers and also ensure that responsible restaurant owners who care about their workers are able to survive the crisis. So we have, in concert with governors and mayors throughout the country, we've worked to launch a program called High Road Kitchen, which is a program that will provide public and private dollars to restaurant owners if they commit to adopting one fair wage and practices tied to racial and gender equity once they reopen next year. Just finally, I'm sure, as you all know, COVID-19 is not only a crisis, but it is a tremendous opportunity for transformation. And at One Fair Wage, we like to say there is no going back. We can only go forward together to ensure that we achieve a sustainable future of shared prosperity. So thank you for having us, Nick, and everybody else. That's our update. Take care.
Beautiful, beautiful way to end it. Thank you so much for being here and for all that you guys are doing too. It's amazing work. It's amazing work. So put your link in our chat as well, and we will be sharing that information. If you have anything else, just please pass it along and we'll do what we can as well.
Appreciate you. Thank you. Take care.
Take care, man. All right. Last up, we have Peggy, and then we're going to hear from Mr. Mike Davis. So Peggy, go ahead.
Well, hi there. You can see the importance of building the unity and cross-fertilization of all of us that were on here today, fighting for justice and the vision of a much better future than what we have now. I want to encourage those of you who live in the South Bay area to join and become members of the South Bay Progressive Alliance. You can do this by going to southbaypa.org. And by the way, that is the website that will also get you a lot of the follow-up information that was sent to us. So if you're already a member and you want to renew your membership, if you haven't already for 2020, you can also go and do that by donating $20, and we'll assume that's for a renewal of your membership. So, you know, these things don't come out from nowhere. It takes people and resources to make this all happen, and we want to build up our funds so that we can establish a stable location and that sort of thing, as well as take care of our current expenses. So please join the South Bay Progressive Alliance. Go to southbaypa.org and fill out the membership form. The membership is $20 a year. That's achievable by just about everybody, but it's also, if you have to, we can waive it. So I hope to see you coming through on that website. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peggy. Right, everyone. So yes, so please check out southbaypa.org and also californiaprogressivealliance.org as well. So without further ado, I would like to bring in Professor and author Mike Davis. For those of you that are not familiar with him, Mike Davis has written numerous books. He's been a longtime advocate or activist. He's currently a professor at UC Riverside, and he is joining us today, and we're just happy to have him. So welcome, Mike, and thank you for being here.
I must apologize. Yesterday morning, my youngest daughter's new puppy ate my hearing aids. Oh. So I have very poor hearing, and I've managed so far to hear everybody except for you, Nick. Oh. So stay close to your microphone so I can understand the questions, okay?
I will do that, Mike. And thank you again so much. I know you're a very busy man. You've been working hard. I've seen the wonderful articles you've been writing, and I know you're coming out with a new book here. So I just really appreciate you taking the time to join us and give us your perspective on things. I'd just like to start off with the fact that, you know, you seem to be something of a prophet here with much of your writings. The way you, with City of Quartz, seem to have predicted the LA riots and Ecology of Fear, talking about the Malibu fires and the case for letting Malibu burn. And, you know, then, you know, you even seem to, you know, talking with Bill Moores over 10 years ago, didn't seem surprised at the 2008 financial crisis. And now we find ourselves in the midst of a pandemic, and we look and we see that in 2005, you wrote a book, Monster at the Door, and you referenced the avian flu and very well captured what we are going through today. So I guess to just start off with that, and just can you give us some perspective on your thoughts in the moment we are in today? And, you know, your question or your comment to President Obama in 2008 of standing at the Grand Canyon, can you see the canyon? You know, those first explorers, were they able to see what was in front of them? Are we able to see what's in front of us, the opportunity amidst the crisis? So I'll open that up to you.
No, of course we're not. Although we have many parallels and analogies, particularly when the unemployment rate is at a level that we haven't seen since 1933. We can go back to the Depression, when we have a president who claims absolute power but no responsibility. We can go watch The Man in the High Tower or The Plot Against America and ask ourselves, is this fiction? But what I'd like to talk about right now is testing and the back to work movement. Now, people are greatly confused about what testing is. And of course, there's two kinds of testing. The first testing was to identify the virus itself. And at the end of January, shortly after the World Health Organization characterized this as a pandemic, they began distributing hundreds of thousands of test kits that had been developed by German scientists. As the Chinese scientists had published the genome of the virus online at the very beginning of January. German scientists came up with a test kit, and the WHO, the World Health Organization, was distributing them. But our Centers for Disease Control decided not to use that and developed their own kit. And they did a very good job of getting it out in time, but it didn't work. So the entire month of February, the time in which you could have prevented this infection from increasing to an out of control, exponentially increasing disease, when you could have stopped it in its tracks and contained it, the way that Taiwan and Singapore, South Korea, and some smaller European countries have done. We lost that chance entirely. Now, the testing we're talking about today is a test that identifies the antibodies, but also the custom T cells that your immune system has manufactured when you are infected with the coronavirus. Problem is, the Trump administration, in the same way it's thrown the states and municipalities into a Darwinian competition, hopeless competition for protective supplies and so on, opened a door to the private sector. 100 different firms jumped in. A lot of the test kits are absolutely useless, and they've completely confused the results. So there's chaos. Now it looks like there will be finally test kits approved by the FDA and undergone some trials that will be available in a few weeks, a month, who knows? But there's a problem with all of this. Because the test kits are being advertised as a way to allow people to go back to work. But the World Health Organization yesterday issued a warning that research has shown that in at least the case of one of the antibodies, the antibodies are directed at two surface proteins on the virus. One of them doesn't seem to provide any immunity whatsoever. And so it warned the world that it may be that these antibodies, and potentially maybe the T cells, who knows, are not going to give you any kind of durable immunity itself. And they expect, as many American doctors do, to see a second wave in the fall, coinciding with flu season. Well, if you've had it and survived, more likely or not, you're under 55 years old, you've been in pretty good health, you may not even notice you had it. But while you had it, you're in imminent danger to anybody in the high-risk categories. And if you get it again, you'll continue to be in imminent risk. We've seen that nursing homes have become mortuaries, basically. 11 or 12,000 people have died. It's the tip of the iceberg. We see now that Governor Newsom pulled out the National Guard because of the incredible rates of mortality in the nursing homes. This should have been done right at the beginning by the federal government. But again, Trump, not my responsibility. Let the states take care of that. And of course, states don't have the resources to do all these things. The federal government did. And also we're haunted by a kind of, I think, almost Nazi attitude that has been detectable not only in the Trump administration, but in the conservative government of Boris Johnson. The most evil word in the Nazi lexicon is a German phrase that means lives unworthy of life. And it's justified the killing of children and adults in Germany with pre-existing conditions, disabilities of one kind or another, also justified the killing of senile old people. Well, we saw that Republican king of fools, Dan Patrick, the lieutenant governor of Texas, say, well, if we have to sacrifice our lives, we older people, to keep the economy going, only too happy to step up. Of course, he hasn't stepped up. This has been repeated on Fox News. The chief advisor to Boris Johnson, of course, got coronavirus, said in a private discussion that was leaked, he said, our objectives are herd immunity, keep the economy going, and if pensioners die, so be it. Lives unworthy of life. This is a Nazi mindset, the same mindset of eugenicists, racists in America's past, and we need to call it for that. But of course, the majority of elderly people, like me, aren't in rest homes. Too many of us live alone and isolated, but most of us live with our families. And of course, one of the most wonderful things about a lot of American families is that they're multi-generational, and that elderly people still form essential tasks, and in turn, they're taken care of by their children. This is especially true in the African American community, the Asian Pacific community, and Latino families. But what happens when people in the family have to go back to work, and then they come home to a crowded house, an apartment, where there's no possibility for social distancing in the household. They basically bring back a great risk of killing these older, or it can be younger, with people suffering from HIV or diabetes or so many other things. They bring back the risk of death. This is a very frightening, vicious circle. And it's one reason that so many unions or union rank and filers are fighting this idea that they can safely go back to work, because what motivates this are two things, obviously: profits and reelecting Donald Trump in the fall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, his reliance on the economy running, and you brought up the component of class and, you know, access to healthcare. We had one of the co-presidents of the California Nurses Association on at the beginning of this presentation, and she was making the case for Medicare for all, and just, you know, highlighting how, you know, we have almost 30 million new people who have filed for unemployment, which means their medical care that was tied to their employment is no longer. So these are 30 million new people that do not have access to healthcare. So even if we did have the tests, they wouldn't likely be able to afford to get the tests. And this is another component of that class issue.
I don't teach anymore at the University of California, Riverside. I retired, but then I got sick, and like a lot of retired people, I had to go back to work for a while. So I teach at the Catholic University of San Diego, which is a wealthy conservative school. But my students, to an amazing extent, supported Bernie Sanders. And many of them cried when he conceded the election. And I tried to argue with them. Look, the fight's hardly begun yet. The next stage of the fight is to ensure that the Democratic platform represent the survival needs of working class Americans in this period, and that Medicare for all is really become non-negotiable. And actually, progressives are in a very strong position, but we should disabuse ourselves the idea that the campaign is just electoral. It's a movement. Sanders says every time he speaks, says they are our revolution people, are reminding us.
Yeah.
And we have to maintain that struggle and that pressure. And nothing would be worse than to merely sit by and watch the coronation of Joe Biden.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have many Bernie supporters, I'm sure, on this call right now. And yeah, it was disappointing to see where that ended up, but I 100% agree that this is only the beginning of the fight. And we've heard from some wonderful young activists and people from all over today, and all the amazing work that they're doing. You know, Medicare for all is one component of it. I know you brought up, you know, the issues of big pharma, and how, you know, had we had a different structure in place, that, you know, a universal vaccine is very much a possibility for influenza. But that will never happen under a profit-driven pharmaceutical industry. So that's another component.
It's interesting that exactly this point was made by the Council of Economic Advisors, Trump's Council of Economic Advisors, last fall. They pointed out that there's no material interest for the pharmaceutical company to make the antivirals, the new generation antibiotics, cures for tropical diseases that are life and death issues for a majority of people on the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be, if you would imagine, say there's a General Motors engineer who's been tinkering in his garage for 30 years. And finally, he builds a car that never needs a repair, lasts forever, it's stylish, and he can produce it GM can produce it at 1/10 the price of its current cars. So he's all excited. He rushes to the board of General Motors. What do you think General Motors is going to say? Develop a product that'll put us out of business? No, thank you. I mean, the way that vaccine and drug development works is that in our public universities and our biggest private universities, where the research are almost always paid by the federal government, new drugs, vaccine ideas, biodesigns are created. Then maybe some of the same scientists who developed them on the public dime, they have a little company on the side. And they hire their brightest graduate students. And pretty soon they have some, absolutely life-saving thing. Now, the big drug companies who spend a lot more on advertising these days than they do on research and development, then either buy up the company and manufacture what's been created, or in an alarming number of cases, they buy the company to suppress the competition of the new drug or product. It's a totally irrational system. Big pharma, who are essentially rent collectors from their ownership of patents, we have no real need for them. No. The system that makes the most sense is the public universities, smaller scientific firms, and the federal government. And it's for that reason that Elizabeth Warren tabled a bill for the public production of prescription medicine. Absolutely. And this a year ago or 2 years ago, this may seem a pretty extreme solution, a little too radical for the likes of Joe Biden and so on to digest. But we see now that this is absolutely what has to happen. You need to take over and make publicly owned the things that are essential to the health and lives of Americans. We cannot depend on the marketplace to deliver those. It's failed. Absolutely, absolutely. We had one question from our audience, if you could try and address. He was asking, could you briefly explain the historical connections between commercial, capitalist agriculture and forestry and mining and the emergence of deadly viruses and epidemics, pandemics? Well, there are two different but closely interrelated things here. One is factory farming, and particularly industrial poultry and industrial livestock. I spent a lot of time in Western Utah because I'm a hobbyist geology. There's a pork plant that you can smell 20 miles away, absolutely overwhelming. Processes 100,000 hogs a year. Go to Arkansas, for that matter, Thailand. You'll find poultry plants that process 1 million chickens a year. There's a very brilliant and wonderful epidemiologist named Rob Wallace, and his book, Big Farms, Big Flu, should be essential reading for all of us. Because basically, the production of meat on this scale is a particle accelerator for the emergence of diseases. But the second factor is that multinational logging companies and big companies, some of them very large multinationals too, who were clearing forests for raising cattle to grow the hamburger for McDonald's, have broken down in the most disastrous ways the borders between human society and previously very reclusive or hidden reservoirs of of viruses. Coronaviruses, for the most part, are resident in bats. And one of the agencies that Trump defunded last year was studying bats and coronaviruses. They identified about 200, all of whom had some possibility of becoming human diseases. Other researchers have determined or estimate that there are 1.5 million yet undiscovered viruses in wild animals, half of which they estimate could be transmitted to humans. Talk about opening up Pandora's box. And finally, another part of this is that small farmers, in absolute desperation, of course, are clearing forests as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what needs to be done is that saving tropical forests isn't just a good cause. It's not a hug a tree cause. It's a matter of human life and death. Equally, factory farming and industrialized meat production is a threat to our lives, as is, for instance, what's happened in West Africa. Do I have 2 minutes to go on with this?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike. I know if people need to leave, they can sign up, but I'm happy to sit here and continue.
Okay, so West Africa is the most rapidly urbanizing region of the earth. Traditionally, coastal West Africans have gotten their protein through fish. And there's 1.5 million, 2 million traditional fishermen, family fishermen, who went out and fished and brought it back, sold it in the markets. But sometime in the 1980s, big factory fleets from Russia, Spain, Japan moved into the Gulf of Guinea. And biologists estimate they took out half the fish biomass of the Gulf of Guinea in a single generation. The price of fish began to increase beyond the means of poor people on the coast, in the coastal cities, to buy it. At the very same time, multinational logging firms in the Cameroons, Gabon, Democratic Republic of the Congo were squeezing their workers by trying to reduce the cost of feeding them. So they hired hunters who would go out and kill anything that moved. Some 70 different species of mammals and reptiles consumed as what's called bushmeat. And this is very profitable for them to do it. But as people in the cities began unable to afford protein through fish, they increasingly turned to this bushmeat, and it became a huge industry in West Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So here you have two forms of corporate accumulation, multinational accumulation, which combined produce the conditions under which HIV, Ebola have evolved, and other diseases will continue to evolve until you address the political ecology of the emergence of these diseases.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you brought up the difference between a Roosevelt type response and a Debsian or Eugene Debs type response. Could you kind of elaborate on that a little bit? What would be a more Debsian response here in light of the situation that we're...
I'm sorry, I didn't get you.
So you've spoken to the idea of the difference between a Roosevelt type response and a Debsian response to this crisis.
So we're in a very unusual moment. Without any transition whatsoever, we've gone to a period where what once were considered totally accomplishable reform goals and the dynamic mass consumer capitalism at the end of the Second World War. That is Roosevelt's famous 1944 campaign, which adopted a second Bill of Rights for Americans. Universal health care, housing, and so on. By the time that Jesse Jackson came along, these demands had been totally forgotten by the Democratic Party after Ronald Reagan, when neoliberals came to power, represented by aggressive young governors like Bill Clinton. Well, the old New Deal politics were abandoned, but they resurfaced, first in the Rainbow Coalition, and then in the first Bernie Sanders campaign. And they proved to be absolutely necessary things that millions of people understood and demanded, but in a different context, where we were governed from so far on the right that these were almost revolutionary demands, okay? And that's what we've been fighting for up to now. But this catastrophe, this conjoined biological upheaval and depression, demand solutions beyond those of the Sanders campaign. Those things are still, excuse me, absolutely essential. Is our simpler demand simply to defend democracy. But now we have to start thinking, I believe, about real socialist demands. I mean, in the Occupy period, we talked about economic inequality. Others began to amend that by saying, no, it's deeper, it's the inequality of wealth. But that's not the end of it. The core problem in this country is economic power. How do we democratize economic power? Well, if the Sanders campaign are Rooseveltian demands in a new context, what would socialist demands in the spirit of Eugene Debs be like? So go back and read the 1910 platform of the Socialist Party. And they demanded the social ownership of the infrastructure, of the utilities, of the banks. Well, we should be demanding the same thing, except that the infrastructure of the 21st century consists of Google, Amazon, broadband, and so on. Let's break up the monopoly presses and monopoly media. But let's put under democratic ownership and management the digital infrastructure that now more than ever we see is an essential basis for life in these centuries. So I think we need to be talking, in a sense, almost in three voices, joining with everybody who doesn't want to see democracy destroyed, advancing the demands of the Sanders campaign, and fighting for them, and the platform committee and beyond, Biden's elected administration. But talking about what real solutions, ultimate solutions are. Because this is not going to be one of these V-shaped curves that Fortune magazine thinks is going to happen. We'll rebound with a whole other boom and stock prices will go up to 30,000, whatever. That's just fantastic thinking. We're in for a period of grudging, difficult, extremely painful life for most people. And we have to go beyond the limits of contemporary political imagination. But we have to do all these things at the same time, and that calls for strategy, tactics, political sophistication. I've seen debates lately where some of my fellow aging new leftists have said, you have to give up everything and vote for Biden. That's all important. It's fascism or Biden. Well, I think we have to vote for Biden too, but that's not the whole of it. Other people representing kind of the millennial left have said, Look, Biden's just a stooge of Wall Street. Okay, we've had it with Obama, Clinton. It's real change now or never. Both these positions, it seems to me, are incredibly simplistic. It's not a binary choice. It's inventing a progressive politics in which I think socialist demands have a larger role that's capable of representing the kind of social struggles and labor uprisings that we're already beginning to see and will increase in volume over the next year to levels we probably never thought believable.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's what we're here hopefully to do today. We've heard from some wonderful activists presenting some great ideas. One last thing I wanted to talk was they just voted on the last or the latest relief bill. And AOC was the only person in Congress to vote against it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, she was correct. And Nancy Pelosi made it seem that the Democrats had gone to the mat very courageously, and they got the most they could hope for. I don't happen to think that was true. I wouldn't be critical of people, progressive Democrats, who went along with it. But I think she was more correct than any of them. I mean, figuring out tactics in this period, it's going to be an incredibly complex challenge. But there's a new leadership in the grassroots, represented by people like the Nurses Union, and in people like Alexandra, who represent in every real way the deep interests of her constituents. Yes, vote for Biden, we have to. But don't give up the struggle. There's no reason to endorse a platform that doesn't deal with the profound needs of people. But the thing is, we have an unusual coincidence in American history. On one side, of growing popular movements and new unionism, 17 million healthcare workers, 2 million more than there are manufacturing workers. Nurses United may be the equivalent of UAW was in 1938. But we have the coincidence of popular movements that will grow volcanically, perhaps. And on the other hand, progressives in Congress and in local offices who have run on principles and a platform and know that their feet are in the fire if they ever go from it. And they have real leverage in the coming administration. So what's happening is catastrophe. But for someone my age who lived through the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement, and who's seen ordinary people's courage, I've seen social miracles pulled off by ordinary people. You're going to see those kind of social miracles again, I guarantee you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mike, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate your time and everything. Your criticism of the system has been invaluable, and you've contributed so much. So thank you so much. We very much appreciated that you took this time with us this afternoon, and we wish you and your family all the best. Please stay healthy, and if you have anything else you'd like to wrap up with, feel free to.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks again, Mike. All right, everyone, that is the end of our presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed and appreciated that. Thank you all for spending your afternoon with us. Please do check out all the resources that have been presented. If you have a local Progressive Alliance in your area, please connect with them. Consider joining them. If you don't have one, consider starting one, or we can connect you with some allies. But please stay connected, stay healthy, and let's continue to push this movement forward. And everyone, please stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you again. Have a great evening.